Dennis, welcome back. It's been a long time. I have no idea actually when, but I suspect it was ages and ages ago.
Well, ages and ages. I'm thinking it's about 20 years, I remember you clearly, and you look about 10 years younger now than you did then, whereas I've lost all my hair.
All
this is a...
I don't know what's going on. This is a confusing show. Everything's backwards. Time is changing in different directions, and who knows what's going on. We've got young people playing music that sounds like it's recorded in the 20s, and it's wild. Before we talk about your current efforts, I do want to go just a little bit of background. Am I right that you were at Harvard at the Kennedy School when you read about or were in contact with the Senator Gaylord Nelson, who was initiating this effort on behalf of this concept, Earth Day? Is that right?
Yes. Senator Nelson had watched teach-ins being used to mobilize people around civil rights and against the war in Vietnam, and thought that college-based teach-ins might work to get some attention for the environment, which really had very little currency then. I jumped into it with all the arrogance of youth. I read about it in the New York Times and flew down to Washington thinking that I would maybe organize Harvard. And I went back with the charter to organize Boston and got a call 2 days later asking if I'd come down and organize the United States, which has got to be the fastest set of promotions I've ever had.
That's amazing, and what an event! I mean, that first Earth Day, just in New York City, where the Central Park, 1 million people or whatever they thought were there, and around the world, 20 million people. Walter Cronkite and Paul Newman, an hour in prime time, and all this stuff was a huge, huge event.
And one thing that's worth remembering in these enormously divisive times now when things have become so wildly polarized around the environment, that New York event was made possible really by the very strong cooperation of Mayor John Lindsay.
That's right.
Who was a Republican fighting with Richard Nixon, who had a Southern strategy to make the party far more conservative, and Lindsay and Nelson Rockefeller, and interestingly, Mitt Romney's father were trying to pull it back the other direction.
Yeah. And Mayor Lindsay agreed to close down Fifth Avenue for you.
That's right. which meant we started with about 200,000 people before we even did any organizing. It was a great leg up.
What an amazing time. And of course, good things followed. You know, that first Earth Day, in some ways set the stage for the passage of the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and all the Endangered Species Act and other things that, as you say, there wasn't much currency for that kind of thinking at that time, right?
That's right. It was a combination. Earth Day really introduced a new vocabulary and this new sense of values to people. But the politicians who went back to their districts to give Earth Day speeches basically had thought of it as kind of a walk in the park with some politicized hippies out on the West Coast and maybe some student radicals. But it was going to be a fad. And then that autumn, we launched what we called the Dirty Dozen campaign. These were all people with horrible environmental records who were in vulnerable districts in which there was an environmental issue that could mobilize people until 4 or 5, 6% over. So we targeted them very carefully. Went after the first one. It was the chairman of the House Public Works Committee, which is to say the chairman of the Pork Committee. And we defeated Fallon in a primary. And one result of that, I think, is that a Clean Air Act that would have been inconceivable in 1969 passed with no dissenting votes in either chamber in 1970.
Yeah, that's wild. Amazing. So quick. Yeah. Now, your early efforts and interest in solar energy also produced some really big results early on, with support from Jimmy Carter, President Carter, and also from Colorado Governor Dick Lamb.
Mm-hmm. Jimmy Carter was genuinely of the belief that we had to get ourselves off Middle Eastern oil and onto domestic resources, and he wanted to do as much as he could, and in the end, we were able to convince him that he could do a lot. We were given a couple $1 million, which back then was still real money, in a year, to pull in the sharpest people we could find in the national laboratories and in prestigious research universities to figure out how much you could get from renewables by 2020. And we punched it up, and ultimately, with a bunch of investments in efficiency, the percentage would be of a much smaller number, we came up with 28% and a fairly rigorous way to get there. And we couldn't sell him on quite that amount, but he was okay signing off on 20% of the nation's energy from renewables. Did I say 2020? 20% by the year 2000.
Oh, wow.
And the missing element, of course, is that there were about 60 specific programs that were supposed to be adopted, and what happened in between was Ronald Reagan. Not a single one of those recommendations was ever followed.
Mm-hmm. And funding was cut.
Yeah, we had a $130 million budget my last year at SERI. It was cut by $100 million.
I think it's puzzling, and I think a lot of our listeners are puzzled, frankly, by the fact that renewable energy, producing domestic energy in the United States, the efforts to be more energy efficient and to be more productive and to lessen our dependence on foreign oil. I think there are a lot of listeners and a lot of people around the country who are puzzled as to why that's a political issue.
Yeah.
Why do you think it is?
I'm as puzzled as your listeners are. I mean, as you've shown here with what is almost certainly the greenest theater in the entire world, we can go out and do it ourselves. Right now we're going to have to pay a little bit of a premium here and there, but we can build absolutely energy self-sufficiency into buildings, into neighborhoods, into communities, and into states.
Yeah, that's exciting, yeah. In case you're just joining us, you're listening to eTown. My guest is Denis Hayes, co-founder of Earth Day, and many, many other efforts. You're now involved also, or you have been for a long time, involved with something called Earth Day Network. And I know through the Bullet Foundation, an organization you're involved with, and you have the pleasure of directing up in the Northwest, you're also involved with architecture and demonstrating, as you point out, the viability and the practicality right now using existing technology of in some ways reinventing architecture.
Reinventing it a little bit like your program, going back to the past, going back to regional architecture. You can get vastly more efficient if you design in a way that is responsive to the natural forces, the prevailing winds, the suns, the seasons of your area. It's tough in some places to reach real self-sufficiency, and in no place is it tougher than Seattle.
Right.
In Seattle, which has a lot of clouds, we are going to be getting enough energy every year from rooftop photovoltaics to meet 100% of the energy requirements of a 6-story office building. Wow. With all of the kinds of things that you'd want in an office building. It'll be heated and cooled, modern appliances, showers in every room because we only have a bicycle garage. We don't have an automobile garage. We also are self-sufficient for water. We have virtually nothing that has any element of toxicity in it. It's all Forest Stewardship Council certified wood, every plank in the building. Yeah. We've tried to push the boundaries. Yeah. We are doing this because we care about it, but we're putting 30% of our total endowment into building this building. And it's got to turn a profit for us, or else our grant-making programs are going to be suffering for it. So we've been very akin to the bottom line. That said, it costs 17% more to build this building than it would for a standard Class A office building in Seattle. And that gets you all your electricity, all your other energy, all of your water and your water purification and storage and everything.
I want to touch on a couple things you said. First is that the cost differential between building a standard office building and building one that is entirely self-sufficient energy-wise, that also captures and will eventually process its own potable water, is 17%. I mean, it adds up to being a big number, but I think that percentage is much less than most people would have guessed. It's got to be, 2-3 times as much to do the best and to make it the greenest. So 17%, I think, is a very important number. And secondly, I think it's critical that all of us remember that you made, in order to make that building, even though it's 6 stories and it's a big office building, you made these incremental decisions about what kind of materials to use, what kind of heating and cooling. You decided to put a bicycle garage in. These decisions were not, they don't only exist on this huge scale. And so I think those are two really important issues that I just want to make sure everybody who's listening hears and groks, because it's big stuff. I love the fact that here you are. You've had a varied and relatively focused career, but it's involved some time in academia, some time teaching at Stanford, some time certainly waving the flag on behalf of the planet in various ways. And so here we are, more than 40 years after the first Earth Day. Are you optimistic? Are you still hopeful?
Sometimes things just have to get pretty bad before the surge comes and you turn the other direction and get mobilized. The United States has not been the friend of the global environment. We have been the principal reason, I think, why the world has not come to terms with climate change, because if we won't jump, it just is really hard to persuade everybody else that they should be doing it. And, America was very anti-foreign interventionist until Pearl Harbor. And then suddenly we had a mobilization, the sort that the world has never seen, where we simply converted ourselves overnight. Or until Russia launched a Sputnik, there was no space race. Suddenly they're up there, and we're like a counterpuncher. And I think that what we're seeing right now in the real world, in the forest fires, the droughts, the destruction of grains, the flooding, the rising oceans, the on, is like this building thing that's coming at us. And ultimately, America is going to wake up, and I hope generate the kinds of creativity and innovation and commitment that we are still probably more capable of than any other country, and lead the planet back from this cul-de-sac.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad to hear you say that. And of course, we're all hopeful for that thing, and we all imagine, we hope that the sort of tipping point is no more tragic or horrific than it needs to be, and we can wake up and we can leave our divisions behind us on behalf of the greater good in subsequent generations. But to you, I have to say thank you for your tireless efforts for more than 4 decades of really trying to rally people around this simple concept, which is that we should take care of our home and we should leave it in good shape for our kids. I mean, it's a beautiful idea, and thank you for your hard work on behalf of that idea.
Well,
if people want more information, Denis, about any of the work you're involved with now, does Earth Day Networks have a website, or is it Bullet Foundation, or where would you recommend people connecting if they want to catch up with what you're up to?
Well, I hope that everybody will be involved in environmental education and outreach into other countries with environmental values, and that's just earthday.net or earthday.org, either one of them. For the Bullet Foundation, if you're interested in the building components, the design, the philosophy, anything about it, that's bulletcenter.org.
Once again, thanks, Mr. Denis Hayes, the winner of this week's Achievement Award, longtime nominee. Thank you, Denis. Thanks for stopping by again.